Edina's expose. I'm not going to ask Edina these questions because Edina is a scholar and has a very structured approach, and she will tell you a story. So while she is telling you her story, I think you may take a rest then and get all your impressions and informations. So Edina, please go ahead.
Okay, Nena, you kind of read my mind. We didn't prepare this in advance. She just guessed it. I would actually rather.
Don't worry.
I would actually.
I'm mind reader. I'm mind reader. Yeah.
Yeah, I would rather lay down my arguments and then you can ask me questions. I will throughout this. I will reflect to something that Emir and Hassan have said, but I will be speaking about the causes of genocide denial in Bosnia and Herzegovina, reflecting on public discourse in Bosnia and Herzegovina, regional public discourse, but also international. And it's really stunning that well over 2 decades, I mean, I keep saying 2 decades of research and analysis of the subject, but it's actually almost 3 decades. Authors and scholars still argue about the nature of the mass violence that was committed against Bosnian Muslims during the 1992 to 1995 war. Some call it genocide, arguing that it was a planned and organized process that took place throughout the conflict, starting in 1992, and that events in Srebrenica were culmination of that process. Some others, and I'm glad to notice that despite of what we read in the media, there is less, like this group is becoming smaller. They do refer to what Bosniaks experienced as at most ethnic cleansing, implying that ethnic cleansing is less sinister than genocide, and also implying that mass crimes that were perpetrated against Bosniaks were kind of random and reactionary. Some say that, and I'm not going to be naming names here, but I will send you my reference list, which I haven't sent yet. I'm sorry, Nena, for that, but I will do this after the lecture. They say that the cleansing of Muslims was too erratic and regionally varied to be called genocide. It is my position that genocide did take place in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it actually started from 1992, and that it eventually led to the killing of nearly 8,000 Bosniaks in Srebrenica in July 1995. So this debate, whether it was a genocide or ethnic cleansing, or whether only Srebrenica is genocide or it began in 1992, is still very hot topic among politicians, journalists. Nena and Jeffrey know it's also among judges and prosecutors. But there is also an ongoing debate on the theoretical level over a framework of genocide, and that debate has not yet been fully harmonized. There is obviously a work of many genocide scholars who emphasize the key role of the states in genocide. And they also argue that genocide does not just occur accidentally or spontaneously. One of them is Irving Horowitz, who says that it means that no genocide is really, I'm just paraphrasing now, no genocide is conducted without the approval of the direct intervention of the state. There are also some that point to the role of non-state actors like Christian Gerlach, and this debate is kind of recent, but also important because the role of the non-state actors who conduct genocide under the supervision always of some state. But still it's necessary to look at that also because they have a significant influence on global levels of participatory violence. Understanding how non-state actors participate in genocide is also important, and researching that in depth is also important, because state authorities often use those non-state actors to obscure their own involvement in genocide. And they serve them to present it as uncontrolled violence that is carried out by rogue non-state actors. I think that the kind of the role of and the relationship of Serbia with Republika Srpska and Republika Srpska Krajina, so with the Bosnian Serb military and political leadership in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Croatia is could be used as an example to kind of deconstruct this relationship. Of course, genocide is planned and largely implemented by state actors and their proxies, but genocide also requires a very detailed psychological preparation of a population, so that portions, or I mean the largest portions of population are at least unwilling to resist the extermination of others. I understand that most of you are selected, most of the students are selected here based on the excellence, so I'm not going to go now into details of explaining of perpetrators, bystanders and saviors. I'm sure you're all familiar among about this debate, but the fact is that when I'm talking about Bosnia and Herzegovina, that the concept of genocide denial among majority Serb population still rests on this psychological manipulation by the Serbian elites. So to ensure that the acceptance of genocide and later denial, to ensure this acceptance of genocide and later denial of genocide, a state must preemptively dehumanize the intended victim group. So for this same, nationalism serves as a powerful force. Nationalism is used by the states to gain approval for genocide because it inherently highlights who belongs and who does not belong. I'm going to reflect now on what Emir said and the word of Kaharli, because I would like you to consider the nature of belonging for a moment, because belonging is more than just a physical presence, and a rejection of those who don't belong involves more than just murders, massive murders of the population that does not belong according to nationalist narrative. The rejection of a group of people involves a rejection of their symbols, of their customs, and their language. So when Emir used this example and said that he was struck that the translator did not understand the word, it seems to me that it reminded him that genocide involves much more than murders. It is the rejection of language, symbols, and customs. And I personally was often in similar situations when I kind of emotionally break in a situation when I don't really expect to be kind of emotionally struck. And I think it is in a situation when our identity is denied on this symbolical level, and especially in places when we kind of least expect it, and or from persons we least expected. I think that had Emir heard Karadzic or Mladic pretending not to understand what Kaharli means, and it's a quite common word used throughout Bosnia, and it means deep sorrow. I don't think he'd be so emotionally disturbed by it. I think it came from, because it came from a translator of a Serbian origin. So, and it also reminded him how genocide denial is dominant on so many societal levels in Serbia. I'm not just doing now pop psychology, and I would like if Emir was here to kind of comment on this, but I will most certainly discuss this with him later. I'm just kind of interpreting this based on my personal experience when I happen to be in similar situations. So this corresponds with Raphael Lemkin's concept of genocide. The genocide entails much more than the killing. It is also a social and cultural destructions. Also, nationalist movements frequently create their own symbols and customs, and these symbols honor loyalty to the in-group and are hostile to the out-group, to the point of acceptance of genocide and later denial of genocide against the out-group. And this is done on many levels: intellectual, media. This is done now through education in Serbia, intellectual and cultural elites, and so on. So these underlying factors to genocide also interacts with what Martin Shaw has described as batteries of coercive powers: legal, administrative, political, ideological, and economic, as well as obvious armed, violent, and military. So defining genocide by killing misses the social aims that lie behind it. This is certainly true in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which has been invaded by forces that had been systematically Serbianized in the previous years. They were coordinated by the regime in Belgrade and in concert with Bosnian Serb civilian authorities, and they specifically targeted the non-Serb population. Now, as a genocide, it's often, and the most dominant narrative in international academic, political, and media discourse is genocide in Srebrenica. But over the 3.5 years, the war claimed approximately 100,000 lives. And it wasn't until the summer of 1995 that this scale and intensity of the killing finally compelled international actors to intervene in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And throughout my work, I have argued that this denial of genocide from 1992 by the international community has actually fueled this discourse of denial of the genocide process from 1992 to 1995. We should not forget that genocide conducted earlier in the Drina River Basin, or over years in Sarajevo and Prijedor and other parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was conquered by the Serbian forces in 1992. The totality of the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina and crimes conducted by the Serbian forces raises questions about how the dimension of these crimes are qualified. I had long discussions about this with Sonia, Jeffrey, and obviously with you, Nena, as well. And so far, the ICT has actually, throughout its judgment, has labeled as genocide only crimes committed in Srebrenica. But there are many questions these judgments pose. Can the label of genocide really be applied only to mass murder carried out swiftly? Is it not genocide if tens of hundreds of people are killed every day for years, as they were in Sarajevo? And I think position of the prosecution team in the case of Milošević and is very clear and is along the lines of Raphael Lemkin, along the lines that genocide is the process. And I have to say that I took that position from very early on in my journalistic and later on academic career. Because by focusing entirely largely on the just scope and density of the killing, researchers risk failing to recognize the deeper social aims of genocide. Understanding the genocide that took place from 1992 to 1995 in Bosnia and Herzegovina requires that researchers take into account the objectives of Serbian state authorities and Bosnian Serb leadership in the context of Yugoslavia's dissolution and an ideology of territorial expansionism. So from at least early 1991, there was a Serb strategy to maintain ramped Yugoslavia that involved letting go of Slovenia and conquering designated territories in Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. The plan was simply known as RAM, or the frame. And witnesses at the ICTY testified that it originated among top Serb intelligence actors in Yugoslavia. And Jeffrey and Nena are much more knowledgeable in detail about this process. And I'm sure if they haven't already, they will be speaking about that or talking with you about that. I would just like to mention one witness whose testimony I discussed with Jeffrey and Nena during my research. It's Milan Babic, who claimed that Milošević and Karadzic had publicly maintained loyalty to Yugoslavia rather than to Serbia in order to conceal their true aim to create a greater Serbia. And the sad truth is that the international community, even its liberal actors, have largely accepted that explanation for a very long time, because Milošević was long regarded as the factor of stability in the Balkans. So there is plenty of evidence in the ICTY, and I recommend Nena's book, Sonia's book, and many Helsinki Committee works and publications. But also, I think it is really structured the best in the prosecution case against Slobodan Milošević that between late March and early May 1992, Serb forces launched coordinated attacks to secure these key entry points into Bosnia, take over major communication lines, and established logistical corridors. And there was a very clear pattern to these attacks. Nothing to it was random or accidental or reactionary, as sometimes Serb political and intellectual elites would like to present now. At that time, Bosnian government forces did not have heavy artillery nor organized army, and they could offer very little resistance to these Serb offensives. So really by early May 1992, Serbs controlled majority, large swaths of the country. It should not be shocking that the war was started in Bosnia and Herzegovina, nor that it culminated in mass atrocities such as that it began as genocide and culminated with genocide in Srebrenica. I'm always surprised when when some of my Western colleagues in the discussion say they were surprised, because those events were actually publicly announced in the public statements of Milosevic, Karadzic, and others. In November 1991, Karadzic publicly threatened genocide against Bosniaks in a speech to the Bosnian parliament. I'm sure many of you know that, but he remarked that Muslims would disappear if the Bosnian government chose to pursue independence. So he said that Bosnia would be taken to hell and Muslims would not be able to defend themselves. There are many other that conversations between Karadzic and his allies that have been used in the trial by prosecution trial of Milosevic and many other trials that clearly state that Serbian and Bosnian Serb political elites had the genocide was their goal. Many orders from the army of Republika Srpska clearly framed non-competence as the enemy. And this is the distinction Martin Shaw uses to make distinction from war and genocide. So Shaw said it's about the function of how the enemy is understood. If the enemy is a state, or is the enemy the state or armed force, or is it a social collective? Shaw explains that genocidal practices treat social groups as enemies, and I'm quoting now, whose power and lives may have to be destroyed. There are endless transcripts, intercept, as I mentioned already, and testimonies collected in the ICTY that prove that this principle of destroying the social collective of Bosnian Muslims, even Bosnian Croats, was at the heart of Serbian and Bosnian Serb visions for war and Serbian plans for expansionism. So, because of all those proofs, and evidence and documents, I'm a bit tired of arguing over whether genocide began in 1992 or it was just Srebrenica in 1995. I think that everybody who dedicated its time to go through original documents and transcripts and transcripts, for example, from Republika Srpska parliament would stop arguing. And they would say, this debate should be really put to rest because it's obvious that, genocide began and they had the intent even from 1991. So maybe I should just now reflect a little bit to the reaction of the West and Western power to their indifference to, first of all, genocide committed by the Serbian forces, indifferences to the genocidal plan, because many of those key international stakeholders knew that, and then they observed the implementation of that genocidal plan. But what's most painful now is this indifference to Serbian propaganda and indifference to genocide denial that is so openly taking place in Serbia and Republika Srpska. And despite all that, Vučić is treated as the ally of the West. I just, it's difficult to fathom that geopolitical interests are so dominant, and that the liberal West, despite the raging nationalism in Serbia and genocide denial, has not conditioned Serbia to admit genocide and then to allow them to go toward the path of European integration. But majority of international community actors, and I'm talking about diplomats and high political circles, are behaving just as they were behaving during the war and genocide in Bosnia. They simply made a decision not to articulate what they clearly saw and what they see now in terms of genocide denial. And here I would like, I'm gonna close.
Thank you so much, Edina. It was absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
And just for your information, we did send you an article from The Intercept where you gave an absolutely wonderful and short analysis of a book published about Radovan Karadzic, which actually attempts to give a human face to genocide planners and executors. And these are the books that in the name of Western objectivity and Western different approaches to human sciences has been sold as, you know, outsider's view, but actually hugely damaging for important message that, as far as we know from the history, there are hardly any excuses for a single politician to have so much power and to abuse it for a completely anti-historical political process, which includes commission of genocide. You need to understand the big message that I got looking into historical perspective of genocide. They are anti-historical, and whoever engages and tries as a politician to justify genocide necessity ends up on the wrong side of history. So think about what is the wrong side of history and what is being a good side on history. This is a huge challenge, but I can tell you it does help me to apply this moral narrative, as we are talking from the first day, that moral narrative does exist, it should exist, and it should express evolving set of values, not from the Western world, but from us as a humanity. So morality is connected with relative set of values. So if people are saying, you know, racism, well, it is part of our culture. Well, they were burning women in the Middle Ages as witches because they were independent. But our value system shows us that we should not base our arguments on these sort of things. So, Edina, thank you so much. I have a suggestion, and I'm not quite sure, Edina, you will have time to agree with these suggestions. We had a very full day, and normally we never longer than it is, but now we are running about half an hour to longer than we planned. Would it be possible for you tomorrow morning to join us for a discussion session, or you would like to have it done now, everything, and forget about us?
Yeah, no, I don't want to forget about you, but I mean, I have.
You're committed. Yeah,
I'm committed. I'm
no
committed
problem at all.
morning. Yeah,
So,
it's an exam season, so I have students.
I know,
tomorrow.
I understand completely. So we are going with your permission, dear participants, to ask Edina 2 questions, and then all other questions you have, please put it on our discussion board, which we'll share with Edina, and Edina may then have time to put it in writing. Is it, Edina, okay with you? We have a discussion.
Yes, that's absolutely fine with me.
Yeah, so please, 2 questions before we let Edina go after spending the whole morning with us, despite of her university obligations. No one?
Yeah, Adam wants to speak.
Yeah, just a quick one.
Oh, yes, yeah.
What are the most effective methods at combating genocide denial?
The most effective methods to combat genocide denial. Yeah, well, I'll have to go back to politics here. So, yeah, it's great to raise awareness about genocide, and that so many to inspire particularly young people in Boston to use the archive ICTY and to write and talk about it. But I'm actually afraid that narratives in Boston and interpretations of what happened, it's on the dog. And okay, I think you can hear me.
I know, it's Sonia's dog, we know the noise.
Yeah,
we talk to her on the phone.
So the narratives are so conflicted in Bosnia that I'm afraid that we cannot have an effective method until political context in Bosnia and in the region of the Western Balkans allows for reasonable discussion about the war and genocide based on facts. For Bosnia, it actually means that it's going to happen when Serbia, but also Croatia, that is a EU member and NATO member, when they stop treating Bosnian Serbs and Bosnian Croats as collaborators, as their proxies, and when they give up on the idea of the division of the Bosnian state. I think that if they recognize fully sovereignty of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and if they inspire Bosnian Serbs and Bosnian Croats to treat Bosnia as their #1 state, as their homeland, it's only then that we will have a political context that will allow us to think about the effective methods of genocide denial. It will be a reasonable discussion that will not be burdened by malign political influences from Serbia and Croatia that are absolutely infecting the discussion and the narratives about the war at this present moment.
Thank you so much. I think each of us from the field would be able to give you our own story, how we encounter deniers. And one of my biggest problems as an academic now as well is that multiply ever-ending new interpretations and narratives is killing the most important and authoritative narrative, because the more narratives you create in every segment of society with a not truth in mind, but some social, political, historical objective, dilutes and makes the real truth less persuasive. So, and I think it would be a wonderful topic to keep with us, Adam, for the rest of the course, because each of us encounters different levels of denier and how our own narrative has difficulty to find the light and an audience. Fascinating, really. Second one, before we finish, because I'm becoming very nervous of keeping you as hostages here now. So,
no, that's okay. It was a very interesting
robbing
discussion.
you of your physical freedom. Yes. Okay, second, and then we'll finish.
I do have a question, but only if nobody else does.
Okay, you go.
My question is that,
to Edina.
Yes, to Edina, the findings by the ICTY and the ICJ of genocide are thought by many, and clearly from your presentation you would likely agree with this, to be minimalistically and wickedly wrong. So one might ask the question, is to have the minimalistic genocidal findings about July 1995 better than nothing? But the very last question and answer that you've had with Adam, I think, raised this: is it better to have had those minimalistic findings, inadequate though they are, because they both generate the genocidal deniers, and that opens up the broader argument that you and many other scholars are raising?
Yeah, I've asked myself that a number of times, but I think it is better to have even that minimalistic findings, because even though they open up these various interpretations and discussions, but they still, to certain extent, restrain. They do restrain denial to rage, even, you know, among Serbian elites, to rage even more. If with these minimalistic findings we have such a high level of denial, can we imagine what would it be like if we didn't have those findings at all? I'm absolutely sure that they would go so much into twisting of history that they would claim that the Bosnian Muslims attempted genocide against the Bosnian Serbs.
Yeah, the scholar in genocide, actually transitional justice scholar, called it shrinking space for denial. But my own ambition is to make our work much more than shrinking space of denial, because now it seems that denial is the starting narrative, because deniers are very much motivated to deny, and we think, oh, everything is obvious. So one of the reasons why we have this topic in this format is actually to say the mainstream narrative should be narrative that yes, genocide did happen, and yes, we have a court decisions about it, but it's much more than the court could and did say. And I think if we take this as a general conclusion of our 2 weeks, 10 days course, I would be extremely happy, as our objectives will be met. It is almost 1:30. I deeply apologize for all of you who were misled by the time, but I'm greatly, greatly appreciative of Edina, who stayed with us the whole morning, and her contribution was just absolutely what we needed to spread out and generalize our discussion from this morning. So I think it was an extremely successful day because of wonderful speakers, guests we had today. Thank you all. You were a wonderful audience. Your questions really made a difference. And Edina will have the last word.
Thank you so much for invited me. I really appreciate you, Jeffrey and Nena, pursuing and this topic and not giving up on Bosnia and the region, and really kind of battling the genocide denial with many of your activities.
Thank you so much, Edina. Thank you all. And despite of being such a poor timekeepers, I do hope to see you tomorrow at 10. We will change a little bit the schedule, and we are putting the halftime judgment in Milošević case to your reading material, just in case you have a time, because much of Edina's source material for her books and her PhD and later her Yale University publication was actually drawn from the work. Then we have to thank to Jeffrey, and halftime judgment in Milošević case clearly said that the genocide and charges launched against him were confirmed. The genocide happened from 92 to 95 period, and that was a process and not one-time mistake by or mistake or goal of the Serb security forces. So this document is of a great historical importance. It is now obscured in the sea of relevant and less relevant material of ICTY, but I singled it out for you. It's a long document, but I hope you will have time to read it from time to time and use it in your academic work. Thank you so much. And many of you we will see tomorrow at 10. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.